The majority of us go through the educational system and life and never learn what's right for us. Maybe it's time for you to create your own definition of success. And that's where we come in. This is the SUCCESSology podcast, here to supplement the traditional education system and life with real-world skills and knowledge, helping you create your own definition of success. SUCCESSology. Here's your host, Rajdeep Singh.
That's great advice. So just to sort of summarize, everyone is on, say, the spectrum, let's call it mental health. And those people who don't take preventative measures over a period of time, they go from dealing with mental health issues to having an actual mental illness. And you also mentioned that, your biggest motivation, and you discussed this with Hala as well. I saw the interview where your biggest motivation for writing the book was that the solution to the problem is the problem itself. You know what I mean? Like the solution to social anxiety is you speak to a professional, you speak to family. But when you have social anxiety, you don't want to speak to anyone. So That's the main reason behind writing the book, and which is great. And the other thing is, we're all trying different identities, trying to see which one sort of correlates the most with us. But over a period of time, because you don't take the preventative actions, those labels become you. You become your labels, basically, even though you're not, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And like the truth is like, I remember if you ever heard of the author Robert Greene, when he came on my show, we talked about this, and he basically told me that like we as humans, like we like to think that we're so unique, and like our thoughts and our ideas and our emotions, they're ours, and we take them personally. The truth is that like we are not the origin of our thoughts. We are very much like the mishmash and the pot of stew in the jungle of all of human civilizations. All different sorts of ideas that we've heard, things from our parents, things from our religion, things from our education system, things from our society that literally form us. And Definitely. So to be quite honest with you, man, I literally felt like when I was 18 that I had no idea who I was. I had no idea, and I was ashamed to admit that, because everyone else has like these perfect identities. Like, oh yeah, I'm a soccer player and I like this. But I felt like for me, I didn't have any of that. And one of the biggest things that has helped me through this process of figuring out, like, inside of my head, inside of my heart, inside of my brain, what is mine? Like, what is authentically mine that I'm proud to hold up and live? And then what is some BS? What is some crap that I know my brain has picked up from the outside world? Mm-hmm. And like, I'll tell you, I first realized this when I was suicidal. And I realized this because I was getting all these different thoughts from my head, all these different negative thoughts. And I truly started to think about those. And I was like, none of these thoughts are actually mine. And you actually start to trace these thoughts back. And it's like, hey, this is actually a belief or a conclusion that my mind believes because, it remembers the terrible racist environment that I was in and all the bad things that I heard and how people treated me and how I was abused a while ago in my life. And so your brain will literally pick up these things and it'll create it inside of its own, and it'll repeat it in your voice.
Yeah, that's the worst thing. Because this is not a conscious experience. This is all happening very subconsciously or unconsciously. And but the end result is it very much becomes it has a consciousness of its own, and then that becomes you.
That's exactly it. And so like that's why people don't know about this before it happens. And I think one of the greatest tools that began to help me conceptually realize this was meditation.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah, and like what I want to say is that there's so many different forms of meditation, but I think for the most part, most society doesn't really understand what meditation is. I think people look at meditation as, like you sit down and you hum, you're like hum, and then all of a sudden you start to feel so zen, and you're in the clouds and you're floating, and then all your stress melts away. There's definitely some meditations like that, but that's not normal meditation. Meditation is like going to the gym for your brain. And so it should be hard. People that try to meditate, they say, oh, I couldn't stop my thoughts, or I couldn't focus on anything except for my thoughts. I couldn't focus. And that's the point. That's so powerful. But the biggest thing that I would say is like what meditation, like the best analogy that I've found for it is, we, like a human being is like an iPhone. Okay. You're like a smartphone. And, you've got hardware, you've got software inside of there, you have the physical body, and then you have all the code, the stuff that makes it run, which is like our mind, our heart, our spirit. And basically what we do ever since we are born, or like ever since our mother gives birth to us, and we're like literally attached to a cord, like we're literally attached to an umbilical cord. And so they cut that. And then what happens is we become attached to a different cord. And that cord is attached to the outside world. And so throughout our lives, we have this constant connection between the outside world and ourselves. And this can be demonstrated by, like, you're an iPhone, and then if you want to charge your iPhone, you take the plug, you put it in the iPhone, and then you put it in the wall. The wall is the world. And it's constantly giving you power. It's constantly giving you energy, constantly giving you information, ideas, beliefs. And so what happens is basically the only time in your life where you ever have a chance to remove that plug from the wall, where you have a chance to disconnect your iPhone, is basically meditation. I don't think there's anything else. There's no other activity, maybe except for like some breathing exercises, where you are in the present moment, in the present reality, where you're not, your eyes are closed, you're detached from the external environment, and you're just on the inside. You're just in that internal world. And when you're just in that internal world, what begins to happen is you begin to see these connections consciously. And you begin to see like, my emotional state is tied into my email, the different like successes, the different notifications that I get of like whether I have a deal that closed in my business, or whether maybe it's somebody angry that doesn't like me. And so you begin to see these connections of how the outside world has been designed to control us. Whether that's, hey, if I'm depressed, I'm going to go eat a cookie because that cookie is going to give me feel good neurochemicals for a limited period of time, but then it's going to hurt me. That connection is saying like every time I'm sad or depressed, I'm going to go hook up with a chick and have sex. Every time I'm this, I'm going to go do this drug. And so we form all these connections throughout our lives that may be incorrect, that may be wrong, that may not actually lead us to getting our needs met, the ones that we need to have met as human beings. And so when you're able to meditate regularly, you see, and you are constantly inquisitive in this process of disconnecting from the external environment. And, like an analogy that I was told by Jay Shetty when I got the chance to interview him was, when you do this every day, when you're meditating, it's almost like you're looking at your mind as if it's like a garden. And basically what you do is, you see the different flowers, maybe you plant a seed and you want to take care of it so that it can grow into a flower. But then also what happens is, because you meditate and you can sort of be more inquisitive, you also see things that happen before they happen. And what I mean by this is like, what happens in a garden is like, if you have a garden and you have flowers, there are going to be weeds that come, and they're going to strangle your flowers. And the truth is like, you don't know where a weed is going to come from. But when you meditate and you can sit down and be still, you can sometimes see these weeds or these problems that are coming in your rear view mirror. And sometimes you can just take them, see them where they are, and just pluck them out and just shut that down and say, hey, I'm not gonna, fall into this connection that tells me that I need outside validation from food. Let me try to see if I can become more aware of this pattern, journal about it, and then find a substitute, find out what my brain and my mind is really trying to communicate to me, where maybe I need some help in this other department, whether that's in terms of my health or whatever. And so, yeah, I mean, that's the way that I think about it. That's been probably one of the most powerful things that I have done every single day, that I have continued to do every single day ever since I was, 18. And I kind of discovered this of meditation for 15, 20 minutes a day. It's so important.
That's amazing. Just to sort of extend the analogy a bit, because you said we humans, we're like iPhones and the world is our charger. Now, if you keep the iPhone connected to the charger forever, the battery is going to explode, or it's going to drain. The performance of the battery over the time will it'll decrease at a rapid rate. So the best thing to do is every day, you just disconnect for 30-40 minutes a day, and that in itself can be so valuable for you that, and this is obviously over a period of time, but I think meditation obviously is one of the most important things you can do on a daily basis, apart from journaling. And I had a conversation with my mentor about spirituality and meditation, and I've been meditating now continuously for about 15 days. I've been meditating before, but it was always on and off. But after 15 days, I sort of realized the vicious cycle we are in when it comes to our thoughts. Because and this is such a weird, it's very difficult to put it in words, but I was just sitting in my desk trying to get some work done. I thought about something, and then I realized, okay, let's be mindful, let's get back to work, let the thought go. And then I think 5 seconds later something else came in, and that's when it hit me. I was like, that's the bloody problem, that's what it is. That's what meditation helps with. So that's wonderful advice.
Yeah, for sure. And what I would say too, to add on to that is, one thing that I have learned is that if you've barely done any kind of like mind training skill or habit, like meditation, like breathing, like being empathetic, like having tough conversations, it's very hard for anyone, but especially those people, to control their thoughts. And if you think that you're going to defeat your thoughts with more thoughts, then you're screwed. Because the truth is the mind is the master of the game. The mind knows more than you do at any given moment. And so your mind knows all your weaknesses. It knows all the different parts of your character that it can expose to get you to do the thing that it wants to do. And so, yeah, man, you're exactly right. We are all in this vicious cycle of thoughts. And it's like only until you realize that, when you just realize that you just need to shut up and just meditate. Like that's when you just realize like, oh, no. When I sit down and I meditate and my brain is trying to tell me, oh, Mark, but like in 2 minutes, get up because you have to write down your to-do list, which you forgot to do, or you forgot this thing. And like your brain literally tries every single kind of excuse in the book to get you to not keep sitting down and meditating. Definitely. And that is the same exact thing that it's going to do later on in the day if you get defeated by its thoughts, which if you don't meditate, you probably will. And
you will, definitely.
And the truth is, like, even if you do meditate, it still might happen, but you have such a powerful example to go off of. And so that's really the power of meditation. It's like seeing, and it's like realizing that vicious cycle when you meditate in the morning before you realize it in the middle of the day. So you already have that understanding, so you can just do what you got to do without your mind, playing ping pong with you.
Absolutely. As Jay Shetty said, you're able to spot the weed coming your way, so you can take preventative actions. That's amazing. So, following your sort of life journey or your life story, you've achieved amazing things. You're just 23, and you've written like an amazing book. And we highly.
Thanks.
I'll put the links in the description. You have a podcast that's in top 100 globally. This is not Apple Podcast. This is globally a top 100 podcast, and that's amazing. Despite having to deal with social anxiety, and you mentioned in your interviews that the main reason was that you had the insight that other people have done it before you. And there's scientific research out there that can sort of help you overcome social anxiety. However, some people, they might not be interested, or they might not even know that they're suffering from mental illness. So there are a couple of things in your book that are so profound that it can completely shift one's perspective. So, the first macro topic that I want to discuss with you is how being socially anxious is not actually our own fault. And this is the evolutionary biology angle that I want to take. So can you just expand a bit more on that?
Yeah, definitely. So if you are alive today, you have to understand that you came from your mom, and your mom came from her mom, and her mom came from her mom, and her mom came from her mom, and her mom came from her mom, and so on and so forth. When you realize that, and you begin to realize that the human beings who are alive today are the offspring, are the descendants of actually the most anxious human beings who existed, because those are the only people who survived. People out there who weren't anxious and who were idiots and who just ran around or something, they probably got murdered by a tribe or some kind of a tiger or something that killed them. And so literally the most anxious human beings were the successful ones, and that's us. And so we all have to realize that when it comes to anxiety in general, but specifically social anxiety, we are sort of like, don't take it so personally, because the truth is that social anxiety is not new, right? And like I talk about this with people who are like in sort of like the older generation, who are like, back in my day, nobody had anxiety, or back in my day, it's like, all right, bro, well, we don't live in that world anymore. Yeah. But one of the biggest things that I tell them is that social anxiety is not a new thing. Where like a lot of people think because everyone's on their phones, it means that everyone has social anxiety, nobody can have a real conversation anymore. And that's just not the truth. That's not really supported by the data. That's not really supported by the facts. And the facts is that social anxiety is the most ancient form of anxiety. It is one of the most primal forms of anxiety that literally has to do with how we even became human in general. And what I'm talking about here is, our brain is this expansive organ that has existed for tens of thousands of years, that has created all sorts of cognitive biases and shortcuts to get us to survive, to get us to think even when we don't want to think in our own consciousness, to do it automatically so that we can just survive. And one of the rules that our brain has created for thousands of years is that if you are not in a group, and if you are not accepted by your group, you are literally going to die. Because if you are not accepted by your group, then that means that you're alone. If you're alone, that was almost always synonymous with you were going to get killed in the woods alone, or like kidnapped and raped or something like that. And so that is what our brain created rules off of. And so when it comes to, if you're like in a meeting, or if you're in some sort of a classroom, or if you're in a group and you feel like you want to speak up, you feel like there's something that you want to say, but then you go to say that thing, and then for whatever reason, it just feels like your brain is not letting you say it. Yeah. It feels like for whatever reason, your brain is just holding you back. You have like this weird feeling maybe in your stomach, in your armpits, maybe your thoughts are racing. And then maybe you do get the chance to speak, and then you totally forget what you're going to say, or you just like, you stutter, or you blither, you bather. And so the truth is, what you have to realize is, if you were in some kind of a group, like in your village, in your tribe, way back before, when human beings lived in hunter-gatherer societies, the truth is like, if you said something that your tribe didn't like, if you said something that was against like the leader of your tribe, one of the most common forms of punishment is social exile, ostracization. And that's literally kicking you out of the group, which your brain equates to you dying in the woods. And so people who are more prone to this, and like, they've done various studies that show people who have social anxiety, on the hardware side of their brain's amygdala, which is responsible for producing the sensation of fear in your body, that is literally bigger. And so usually social anxiety is triggered by the being in the wrong environment, genetics. Usually it's triggered by some sort of a traumatic event, some sort of an event that where you're socially humiliated, where you get exiled. And that can be metaphorically, or that can even be symbolic. And so when that happens for a certain percentage of the population, that is when all of a sudden, the system scrambles, and it's like, oh my God, now we have to regulate our nervous system to make sure that we never experience this feeling of social exile again. And so if you have social anxiety, that means never speaking again, never opening your mouth. And so that is really what social anxiety is, at least at a basic evolutionary level.
So yeah, so it's just, if you are anxious, so that's the biggest thing when it comes to public speaking, is people freak out because they, you literally don't want to stand out. It's not your fault, but there are ways to sort of overcome it, which we'll be discussing shortly. The other thing that stood out was the Immortality Project, and this is, it hits so close to home because, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, this is exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to wake students and young professionals to realize that life's much more than what your society and the education and even sometimes parents have told you about. So can you just briefly discuss the Immortality Project, and then we can move on to the specifics?
Sure. So I talk about this in my book because basically one of the most primal fears at our conscious level is that one day we are no longer going to exist. One day we are going to die. And so it's debatable that there's this theory that throughout our entire lives, we always have some very basic, low-level feeling of anxiety because we are going to die. And so that is a fact. We all have that. And the truth is when you look at our society today, I can't speak on where you live, but at least in America, and I would say most developed countries, we have completely just like put death in a bubble and then just stepped outside of that. Like we have these funerals, we have these different places where we put dead people, but nobody really thinks about their death. And so if you live in that kind of society where we have just decompartmentalized and just put death in like this specific area that is reserved for funeral homes or churches, a lot of us end up growing up thinking that we're going to live forever, and more importantly, acting like we are going to live forever. And so, one of the biggest things that if you look across human civilization is this idea that every single person who has wanted significance, that has wanted validation, that has wanted purpose, legacy, influence, they realize this. They realize that they're going to die one day. And they realize that when they die, they're gone. Nothing is going to last of them. However, it's just whatever they leave behind. And so that's why there are statues. That's why there are books. That's why there are paintings. That's why there are all these pieces of art forms or other things where we try to leave a piece behind. So like, for example, I know if I die today, my podcast is still going to exist. There's almost 600 episodes of me talking about that. I have a book. I have, different things that are already made and will continue to live on. If you have a company, if you have a foundation, some sort of a charity, this is another great example of how you can sort of build yourself into the world. And so yeah, all of us, we all have a need to actually do this at a subconscious level. And so, yeah, that's like one of the biggest things that I've learned, because the truth is like, when you start to think about your death, when you start to think about like, oh, holy crap, I'm actually not going to live forever, and literally I could die tomorrow, then you start to think about like, oh my God, like there are so many things that I haven't experienced yet. And the truth is when you start to think like that, you also start to think like, hey, I have social anxiety, or I have this problem, or I'm depressed, or my business shut down, or my parents hate me, or my kids hate me. And you have this massive problem in front of you. But then it just becomes like, hey, do I want to be on my deathbed and just be like, man, thank God I played it safe. Man, thank God, I didn't tell that person what I wish I told them. No, you're absolutely not going to say that, because the truth is that when you die, you are truly going to, if you weren't living your life the way that you wanted to live it, you're going to have so many regrets. And the truth is like, when you die, none of this stuff is going to matter. None of this petty stuff that our ego wants to blame, of you getting embarrassed in a social situation, none of that is going to matter. The only thing that's going to matter is what you actually did. And so for me, that was one of the biggest motivations that I had, on top of the Immortality Project, of like literally just realizing that I'm going to die. Because when you do that, then you actually are like the person you want to be. So like, for example, I'm on this podcast with you. I was a little bit late to this because I was on a different call, and I opened up Zoom, and then right in front of me I have two different options. I have one option is just like, okay, Mark, just like do whatever, answer this guy's questions just to get by, give him the most basic thing just to do it, whatever. Or, hey, Mark, it's been a pretty long day, already. I've already talked a lot. I'm a little bit unfocused, but regardless, I'm going to present myself in the best way and give the most authentic answers possible, because I know I could literally die right after this interview. And this would be the last interview that would be out there. And for all I know, there could be, like a 16-year-old version of myself who's listening to this podcast, who maybe wouldn't be pulled to it if I didn't present my authentic self. And so I do this every day. Like, for example, I talk about this in the book, but I have a reminder that goes off my phone every single day that says, Mark, you're going to die one day. Life is short. Don't take things for granted. Live in the present moment. And so I have that goes off every day. It used to go off for me twice a day, but now it's just one a day. But this is one of the most powerful things, because the truth is like, once you like discover this about death, then you discover what life is truly worth living for. And so, yeah.
That's especially the thing about the 16-year-old boy. That's amazing. And I just wanted to sort of thank you. I understand it's been a long day for you as well. So, just thank you so much for being so detail oriented in your answers. I really appreciate that. And so, you've discussed so many things in your book, the exact ways to sort of overcome social anxiety. So we can't cover them all, but there are just a couple that I'd like to discuss. The first thing would be, hands down, the biochemistry. And this is, I think, the most undervalued thing, especially now. It is your diet and 100%. Your sleep. Because the diet is like when you're at home, you're constantly at home, you're not going to office. So you basically I'm guilty of this. I've let my diet go. And as a result, I've gained weight. I'm sort of dealing with those problems on top of my, say, the podcast and the startup. And then sleep, because, used to be a balance between work and then your personal life, which is gone now. So both of these are, taking a massive hit. So what are some of the best practices for both?
Okay, so here's what I would say, man. So if you told me 4 or 5 years ago to focus on my diet, I would say, like, why does that matter? Like, isn't that only for losing weight? Mm-hmm. And the truth is that our society, our world, just doesn't really have a great understanding of health in general, and specifically how that relates to mental health and our food and our diet. So, one thing I want to cover before that real quick is one of the most powerful things that I learned is that anxiety and depression is, it's one of those things that if people have it, they take it personally. And what I mean by that is, like, people will say to themselves, you know, I have anxiety, depression, even if they don't know it or not, or they just think bad about themselves, and they think, I can't possibly do this because of that. And the truth is that anxiety and depression are literally like these scientific phenomenon that's happening in your brain. Like, it's bigger than you. And so you shouldn't necessarily blame yourself for that or say that it's your fault. And one of the most powerful things that I began to learn that helped me shift this mindset was the fact that if you can understand that anxiety, depression, any of your problems are really more scientific based, then what happens is you no longer look at yourself as a moral or ethical failure, which actually prevents people from working on themselves, which actually prevents people from whatever it is, changing their diet, fixing their sleep, doing whatever. It's the fact that they don't think they're worth it because they're caught up in this shame and guilt cycle because they are taking personally and they're looking at themselves as an existential failure. When in reality, the way you should be looking at it is more or less of like, from a more curious approach of looking at yourself like a science project and saying like, hey, you know, let me experiment with these things. Let me experiment with these habits and see what happens. And so, you know, I'll just cover one for now for the sake of time. But one of the biggest things that I can say that will literally change the way that you think about everything is literally this, man. So there is this neurotransmitter called serotonin. And, you know, neurotransmitters, they control most of our lives. Whether you're happy, you're sad, you're hungry, you're angry, you feel lonely, how you talk to people in social groups, that is all a result of neurotransmitters. That is all a result of brain chemicals that are happening beneath your surface that you have no idea. And so when it comes to one specifically, serotonin, this neurotransmitter serotonin, this controls and this regulates your mood, this regulates your appetite, and this even regulates how you talk to people in social groups. And so for most of you know, the scientific community, like 10, 15 years ago, they thought that because serotonin is a neurotransmitter, it's got to be in your brain the same way that all the other neurotransmitters are in your brain. It turns out they're actually wrong. It turns out 90 to 95% of serotonin isn't even in your brain. It is in your gut microbiome, which is directly connected to what you are eating. And so in terms of your diet literally directly controls what neurotransmitters are being properly operated and functioning in your brain through your gut microbiome. And so when it comes to like what you should be doing and what you shouldn't be doing, you know, one thing I will say is there's no such thing as a universal healthy diet. There's no such thing as everybody should be going keto or everyone should be going vegan, because the truth is that's just not true. And it doesn't play out for everyone. But the some of the fundamentals are completely avoid artificial things. So if you buy food that comes in a box or a bag, flip it over, and if it has ingredients that are like, they don't make sense from the perspective of like, you read them and it's like, you know, it's like you know, normal natural ingredients like chicken, salt, lime, garlic, and then all of a sudden it says like you know, monosodium red 6 maltodextrin. You don't understand that, not because like you're supposed to be a scientist or a doctor to read what your food says, but the rule is, if you want proper health, is when you look at that ingredients list and you don't recognize it, your body won't recognize it either. And that may have varying side effects depending on the person. For some person who eats it, that may be, they become, you know, that may be like their metabolism messes up and they become obese. For somebody else, it may be anxiety. And so there's many different ways that this plays out in each person. Or for someone else, it may be a stomach issue. Or for someone else, it may be an issue with their sinuses. But the one fundamental is that we should not be eating anything artificial. We should be eating 100% natural foods, at least at a basic level. And if people want to take it a step further, a friend of mine, Naveen Jain, he has this company called Viome, and it's the world's only company that can functionally test your gut microbiome as well as your mitochondria and other things, that then gives you direct results and access that tells you specifically how you should change your diet and what you should be eating, what you shouldn't be eating. And so, yeah, I mean, there's some complexity to it, but the truth is you should just eat natural foods. And if you do that, you will have a direct causation correlation with the neurotransmitters, which literally are controlling your emotional states and controlling your energetic states.
Right. And with regards to sleep, I mean, the rule of thumb should be to get 7 to 9 hours of sleep. I mean, that's what I've read in some of the research.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm definitely not an expert on this, but what I will say is that the national recommended government average is 7 to 8 hours. 7 to 8 hours. Plus or minus 30 minutes, depending on the person.
That's amazing advice. So, I'm so happy for you, the way you've taken such difficult adversity and you've turned it into something so profound, and you've actually left when you're on your deathbed, you won't have regrets because you've created something that's much bigger than you. You know what I mean? It's going to help people for much longer than after you're gone, for example. So, but say some people, they, as I mentioned, they don't even know, they're suffering from anxiety and stuff like this. So how can people, and this is my last question, is how can people harness shyness and turn it into a superpower like you have?
Yeah, man. So this is the truth. Because I was shy for so many years, I am now the world's greatest listener. And so my brain now has just been conditioned to, I'm literally one of the world's greatest listeners because I didn't talk for most of my life. And because of that, I'm able to understand people in a way that most people normally can't do. And so, that's one of them personally for me. Another one is the fact that because I lived in most of anxiety, the truth is that if you can harness that anxiety, you can use that as a superpower. And what that means is another example is, anxiety is a lot of thoughts. And the truth is that's what's enabled me to be a fast thinker, whether that's in a business meeting or in a conversation or in a podcast or in a speaking event. I'm such a fast thinker and I'm able to produce ideas because that's what my head was telling me every single minute of every single day.
Yeah, I see that because this podcast, this isn't scripted. You've not read the questions before, but you have the ability to pull one thing from here and one thing from there and then create something amazing. That's wonderful.
Yeah, and so that's literally the work of anxiety, man. And so the best part is when you start to do these things, then you start to shift your level of anxiety. And once you start to reduce that level of anxiety by eating healthy, by meditating, then it's much easier for you to then harness it and then use it without it sort of hitting you back in the face. And that's the main thing I would say.
True. I think we're almost done. We're done with the time. Actually, it's 5 past.
Yes.
If there's one final piece of advice that you'd like to offer to our listeners, what would that be?
I would say it's super easy to listen to a podcast episode. You should get out there, take 3 takeaways from this podcast, write them down, write it on your phone, and then do them, and then send me or Rajdeep a message after. And that's how you actually learn something.
Definitely take action. Knowledge is only potential power, as Jim Quick says. It's taking action that truly sort of consolidates that power. Wonderful advice. So I think that covers everything. So once again, thank you so much for coming onto the show.
Okay, brother. If I can help with anything, feel free to let me know. Okay. It was a pleasure. You're a great podcast host. All right, brother. Take care. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the SUCCESSology podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you like the show, make sure to leave a review on Apple Podcast and share it with a friend. That would help too. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hook up with Raj on his personal LinkedIn at Rajdeep Singh, on Instagram at Rajdeep.1997, on Instagram at SUCCESSology.podcast, and on YouTube at SUCCESSology Podcast, helping you create your own definition of success. Make your own path to get there quicker. Until next time, this is the SUCCESSology Podcast signing off.